Hi, I'm Rachel. And yes, his mother actually asked me, "Can you even spell asset?" before sliding a prenup across a linen-covered table. I thought that was the worst of it. Until I found out she used my own money, millions I invested, to boost her reputation. She smiled at our engagement party like I was a win. But behind the scenes, she had already prepared the divorce papers, weeks before her son proposed. They didn't just plan to exclude me, they built a system to erase me. Ever wondered what it feels like to be welcomed into a family that's already written you out? Let me tell you. The first time I met Devron's parents, it wasn't the meal I remembered. It was the way his mother smiled at me. The kind of smile you give a hotel receptionist when you want an upgrade, not warmth, just polite pressure. The restaurant she chose for the evening was all white tablecloths and water poured from crystal. French, of course. Uptown Seattle. Her territory. I had put on my best navy dress, kept my makeup soft, and made sure my heels weren't too high. I didn't want to appear like I was trying too hard, even though I absolutely was. I mean, who wouldn't? Meeting the family of the man you love, that carries weight. And Devron, sweet as he could be, assured me it'd be fine. They're a bit formal, he'd warned, but once they get to know you, they'll come around. It didn't take long for me to realize Malis wasn't waiting to get to know me. She was waiting to confirm a judgment already made. "So, Rachel," she said after the waiter poured the Pinot, "you work in finance?" "Yes," I answered, with a practiced smile. "I work with early-stage startups, mostly in fintech, helping them optimize funding strategy and forecast growth. I'm a consultant." She tilted her head, swirling her wine, then delivered the first blow with a soft chuckle. "Tell me, Rachel, do you work with numbers because letters were too complicated?" There it was. A joke, technically. The kind people at her level deliver with a straight face and a glint in the eye. I smiled back. "Well, I've found numbers don't lie. People, on the other hand." She raised an eyebrow, and for a fleeting moment I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd earned a point. But her smile only widened, fixed like a mask. Devron laughed softly, nervously. He didn't look at me. Dinner continued with awkward courtesy. She asked about my family, and I told her I was raised in San Antonio, Texas, by my mom and grandfather, both school teachers. She nodded, as if that explained everything. Later in the evening, after I'd spoken with real enthusiasm about a startup I'd helped secure Series A funding, Malis leaned in again, voice low, but not quiet enough. "That's adorable. Can you even spell asset, sweetheart?" I froze for a second, not visibly, but internally, like someone had flicked a switch in my brain. She smiled, took a sip of wine, and turned to the next guest as if she'd commented on the weather. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have the words, but because I understood what was happening. This wasn't about conversation. It was about positioning. "When they go low, we go high," Michelle Obama once said. I believed in that, but I also took notes. That night, I mentally underlined every word. The next afternoon, I got a text from Devron. "Mom wants to stop by real quick. She's curious about your office setup." I wasn't thrilled, but I didn't say no. I had nothing to hide. Malis walked into my downtown loft like she was inspecting a rental. She looked over the sleek standing desk, the stacked ledgers, my dual monitor setup. She scanned the bookshelves like she was looking for dust. "This is cute," she finally said. "It's nice that you have a little consulting side hustle." A side hustle. I'd managed portfolios that outpaced her charity's endowments. I'd advised 2 companies that were now on Forbes's radar. But to her, this was a hobby. "Not everyone gets to play on Wall Street," I said calmly. "But we all find our own game." She smiled again. That smile was becoming familiar. It was the kind of expression that seemed complimentary, but if you stepped back, you realized you'd just been dressed down in pearls. As I walked her out, she paused by the door. "Devron told me you're independent. That's good. A woman should always be able to support herself." "Good thing I already do," I replied, still smiling. That night, alone in my loft, I replayed it all. The digs, the dismissals, the performance of politeness. A flash of a memory hit me. Age 12, at a school awards ceremony. I'd won top marks in math, and one of the parents said to my mother, "Well, of course she's good with numbers. That's all she'll ever need." I didn't understand it then, but I understood it now. They don't need you to fail. They just need to believe you were never supposed to succeed beyond their permission. At dinner, Devrin had heard it all. He didn't correct her. He didn't push back. Just a soft chuckle here and there. "Sometimes," I whispered to myself, staring into the mirror above my sink, "the loudest betrayal is silence." I touched up my lipstick, but the weight in my chest stayed where it was. If this was day 1, what was day 90 going to look like? It was a crisp, cloudless morning when Devrin and I pulled up to his parents' estate for Sunday brunch. Everything about the house felt like a monument to curated tradition. Polished floors, oil paintings in heavy frames, even the flower arrangements looked rehearsed. It was the kind of place where everything and everyone knew its place. As I stepped into the sun-drenched dining room, I reminded myself to breathe through the subtle choreography of the Hales, how to sit, how to nod, how to exist without taking up too much space. Malis greeted me with that same deliberate smile. She gestured to the table, where coffee and pastries were set between elegant porcelain and silver utensils. "Rachel," she said smoothly, "now that everything's moving along so nicely, we should discuss protecting the family. Protecting the family." Devrin reached for a croissant like this was the most normal conversation in the world. But I already saw the envelope placed next to my plate, thick, ivory, sealed with the Hale family crest in gold foil. They didn't bring out champagne. They brought out contracts. Malis poured herself tea, then passed me the envelope with a controlled motion. "It's just a formality, dear. All of our family signs one." I looked at Devrin. He avoided my eyes. "It's no big deal," he mumbled. "No big deal. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't need to. Not yet. I already knew what it contained. Legal clauses, financial walls, a quiet message. You are not us. You may love him, but we don't trust you." I swallowed my reaction. No scene, no drama. That's what they were expecting. I smiled, picked up my coffee, and said nothing. Later that afternoon, we moved to the patio for what was supposed to be a casual planning session for the engagement. A handful of family friends and distant relatives gathered, sipping cocktails under white parasols. On the side table were mock-ups of wedding invitations. I wasn't planning to look, but one of the guests, a cousin maybe, handed me a stack. "Your name's so unique, it'll look lovely in calligraphy," she said. I smiled politely and glanced at the cards. Hosted by Mr. and Mrs. Jonathan Hale, and their son Devrin Hale. No Rachel. No mention of me. I flipped through several copies. The design changed. The message didn't. I cleared my throat gently, holding one up toward Malis. "Is this a draft?" She didn't look surprised. Or sorry, just composed. "We assumed simplicity was best," she said. "Sometimes names clutter the visual balance." The air stilled for a moment. Devrin said nothing. I nodded slowly and placed the cards back on the table. It wasn't oversight. It was erasure, intentional and polite. I stood there, invisible in the middle of my own engagement party. Later that evening, on the drive home, Devrin finally spoke. "I didn't think it would bother you," he said. "It's just how my parents do things." He reached for my hand across the center console. I let him take it, but in my mind, I was elsewhere. Back in high school, I once made the honor roll, and the principal forgot to read my name during the ceremony. When I went to the office the next day, he told me it had just been a typo. No apology, just a blank face and a weak smile. That's when I learned something. When you're not part of the system doesn't see you, even when you're standing right in front of it. This wasn't the first time I'd been overlooked, but it would be the last time I let it happen without response. I stared out the window, watching the lights blur past, my reflection in the glass more focused than ever. I was starting to realize this wasn't a wedding invitation. It was an erasure. If the prenup was just a formality, why did it feel like a test I wasn't supposed to pass? That question kept turning over in my head as Devrin drove us to the engagement luncheon at his family's country club. The air was too quiet between us, the kind of quiet that didn't ask for answers because neither of us wanted to say them out loud. He kept tapping the steering wheel like he was rehearsing something, but whatever it was, he never said it. As we pulled up to the valet circle, I caught my reflection in the side mirror. Hair perfect, makeup subtle, smile practiced. I looked like someone being celebrated. I didn't feel like it. Inside, the room was already buzzing. Tall floral arrangements towered over white linen tables. Crystal clinked gently as guests toasted something or someone. I spotted Maylis near the bar, regal in her structured cream blazer, a glass of champagne balanced between two fingers like an accessory. She waved when she saw us, and my stomach tensed. The MC stepped up to the mic, clearing his throat dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "please raise your glasses to the beautiful couple, Devon Hale and Ms. Rochelle Barnes." The air shifted. A beat too long passed before a few guests clapped politely. Others exchanged awkward glances. Someone whispered, "It's Rachel, right?" Under their breath, not quietly enough. I smiled, correcting him gently. "Actually, it's Rachel, with an A." Maylis, without missing a beat, let out a laugh that sliced through the moment like a blade. Names can be so complicated when they're not from this circle, can't they? And just like that, the moment moved on without me. The MC chuckled nervously. The crowd returned to their flutes, and I stood there, my cheeks burning, pretending not to notice that I'd just been served a public lesson in hierarchy, one where my presence was allowed, but never respected. It was my engagement lunch, and I felt like an extra son. As the toasts ended, a hostess approached me with a small folded card. "Your seat, Ms. Barnes." She paused, flinching at her own error. Rachel. I followed her to the far corner of the room, near the swinging doors to the kitchen. The table was small, round, tucked by the emergency exit. My table mates, a teenage cousin scrolling her phone, an intern from Maylis's nonprofit, and a guest assistant who hadn't said more than 5 words since I arrived. From across the room, I saw Devon seated next to his uncle and godfather, laughing over something in their glasses. At the head table, Maylis held court, glowing in the center of attention she curated so perfectly. I looked down at the linen napkin in my lap, crisp and untouched. I wasn't just misplaced, I was managed. They hadn't shoved me out of the room. They simply positioned me where I'd be least seen, least heard. That's the trick with erasure. It doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in moments like these: a wrong name, an unspoken seat assignment, a polite laugh too sharp to be accidental. Where people put you at the table is exactly how they see you in life. As I pushed salad around my plate, I thought back to a middle school field trip when the teacher accidentally left me off the buddy list. I had stood on the curb waiting to be assigned, while the others were already climbing onto the bus in pairs. When I told her, she said, "Sorry, Rachel, must have slipped my mind." Slipped. This wasn't about a wedding. It wasn't about love. It was about power, about branding, about image. I wasn't being welcomed into their world. I was being repackaged to fit into it, small enough to manage, but never significant enough to threaten. As I sipped my lukewarm iced tea, Maylis walked by with a fresh glass of white wine. She leaned in ever so slightly, whispering as if sharing a compliment. "We must keep things elegant, Rachel," she said. "Let's not draw attention to what doesn't belong." She didn't pause to hear my response. She didn't need to. She knew there wouldn't be one, not yet. But what she didn't know, what none of them seemed to notice, was that I'd already begun documenting. I wasn't going to shout. I was going to build, brick by brick, word by word. If they wanted a story without me, they'd regret not asking who was holding the pen. When someone keeps misplacing you, it's not a mistake. It's their message. That thought played on a loop in my head the morning we returned to the Hale estate for a casual financial check-in. That's how Devon framed it anyway, just brunch and logistics. But I'd learned by now that nothing in his family came without subtext, especially when the words finance and estate showed up in the same sentence. I had barely stepped out of the car when a house staffer handed me a sleek white envelope with my name printed in bold letters. "From Maylis," he said, before disappearing back through the side entrance like he was delivering a utility bill. Inside the envelope, a budgeting workbook, a spreadsheet template on a USB drive, and a typed note on thick ivory paper. A strong marriage starts with a strong budget. We believe in empowering women to manage their spending wisely. I stared at the phrase for a long time. Then I read it again. Manage their spending. Not investment strategies, not wealth building, not partnership, just managing spending. I walked into the house holding the envelope like it might combust. Upstairs, Devon was already in the study, seated beside his mother at a long oak table. A third chair had been placed near the edge, mine, obviously. I slid into it without a word, setting the envelope down with a little more force than necessary. Malis greeted me with a smooth nod, as if she hadn't just sent me a glorified budgeting starter kit. Good, you've had a chance to review it. We like transparency before the vows. Keeps the marriage clean. I said nothing. Devon coughed into his hand. So, Rachel and I talked about setting up a joint trust, something for our future, investments, real estate maybe, mutual, equal contributions. Malis's smile tightened. That won't be necessary. A man's voice crackled through the speakerphone on the table. For asset protection purposes, Rachel will not be listed on any Hale family accounts or trusts. Her individual contributions, of course, are her business. But mixing funds, especially with an unmarried partner, poses long-term complications. I blinked. Unmarried partner. We're engaged. Malis folded her hands. Which isn't legal binding. Yet, we're simply being practical. Devon shifted in his seat. Let's just keep things simple for now. I turned to him slowly. You know I've managed over $60 million in client portfolios. You've seen the contracts I've closed. I built my own firm from scratch. But here I am, being told I'm too unstable to share a line on a spreadsheet. Devon flinched. That's not what anyone's saying. I met his gaze and didn't blink. That's exactly what they're saying. And your silence is agreement. Malis chimed in, her voice silk but sharp. This isn't personal, Rachel. It's policy. I laughed, quiet but bitter. Right. Policy. We left early. Or rather, I told Devon I needed air and walked out before he had the chance to respond. He followed me, of course, because that's what he did. Followed discomfort, never stood in front of it. Back at the condo, I placed the workbook on the counter, opened it to the first page, list your monthly expenses, and slowly tore it in half. Devon walked in behind me, quiet. I didn't bother to look at him. This ends here, I said. I'm not marrying into a system where I'm treated like a risk factor. He exhaled. You're overreacting. I turned, calm, precise. No, I'm finally reacting. For once, he had nothing to say. Later that night, as I curled up on the couch with my laptop, I received a message from a former colleague in Palo Alto. Didn't realize you were tied to the Hale family. Interesting timing. Call me. My eyes narrowed. I stared at the screen, heart pacing, not from fear, but from instinct. What the hell does that mean? It was past 10 p.m. when I finally called Marcus. He was a senior partner at one of the first firms I ever contracted with. A man I respected not just for his business acumen, but for his brutal honesty. He picked up on the second ring. Didn't expect to hear from you this late, he said, his voice low and casual, like always. I need to ask something, I said, pacing my condo with the phone pressed tightly to my ear. About a financial records request. Did someone from the Hale family reach out about me before I got engaged? He didn't hesitate. Yeah, Malis called in a favor, full vetting. I assumed you knew. I stopped walking. Marcus, I said carefully. That was 6 months ago. I know. He paused. She made it sound like you were applying to a job, not marrying her son. I bit my lip until I tasted metal. Thanks for telling me. I figured it wouldn't matter after the ring, he said, but then added, guess I was wrong. I ended the call and stood there, holding the silence like it might drop something important. The next morning, I didn't say anything right away. I waited. We were back at the estate for brunch, another round of white linen, glassware that caught sunlight, and polite warfare disguised as family bonding. Malis greeted me with her usual curated warmth. Devon looked tired, but not like he hadn't slept. He looked tired of pretending. Midway through brunch, Malis turned to a woman beside her, a gallery owner, I think, and said, "Rachel has such ambition for a girl from Texas. It's admirable." I looked at Devon. He sipped his mimosa. That silence was louder than any insult Malis could have crafted. It confirmed what I already knew. He was never going to defend me. Not then, not later, not ever. There's a quote I came across once, something Desmond Tutu said, "If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." I didn't need to look at Devon again. I'd heard everything I needed in that sip of champagne and that hollow glance away. That evening, after we got home, I stood in the kitchen, watching the light shift across the floor. I didn't cook, didn't turn on music. I just waited until Devon stepped in, hands in his pockets, like a child bracing for a reprimand. "Do you think I'm overreacting?" I asked. He sighed, already playing the role. "You're reading too much into everything." "No," I said. "You're reading only what's convenient." I walked closer, my voice steady. "Devon, I love you. But if love costs my voice, my worth, or my peace, I can't afford it." He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "My mother's just cautious. She vetted me like I was applying to be her accountant. She didn't even pretend it was about trust. And you stood there, let it happen, then told me I was imagining things. It's how my family does things." "Well, it's not how I do things." I turned away, not because I was done, but because I was just beginning. He didn't follow. Later that night, I sat on my balcony, the city lights bleeding into the skyline. I opened my tablet, logged into every account I'd ever touched during the Hale discussions. I created folders, labeled emails, organized timestamps. Everything. If they wanted to vet me, let's see how they handle being investigated too. I hadn't slept well in days, not from stress or anxiety. Those had come and gone. What I was left with was calculation, a kind of quiet, methodical focus that didn't shake. I'd stopped trying to make sense of how I was treated and started following the trail of how they profited from it. That morning, I locked myself in my office in Palo Alto. 2 monitors lit up, one with old client reports, the other with foundation documents I'd archived out of habit. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for a paper trail. Hours passed. I clicked through contracts, investment schedules, donor acknowledgments. Then I found it. Tucked inside the Hale Foundation's annual report, under notable anonymous contributions, was a number that caught my attention. 7 figures. A trust account number, one that looked familiar. I cross-checked it with the ledger from 3 years ago, back when I'd contributed to a fintech education fund through a silent vehicle under my LLC. The beneficiary had been altered, not on my system, but on theirs. The money had been redirected, straight into Malis's foundation portfolio, not listed under my name. No acknowledgement, nothing. They hadn't just overlooked me, they'd appropriated me. They didn't just ignore my worth, they repurposed it for their prestige. And the world clapped for it. By the time I closed the file, I couldn't decide what I felt more, betrayed or impressed. That kind of quiet theft requires strategy and audacity. But mostly, it requires knowing the person you're stealing from won't notice or won't fight. I wasn't either of those women. That evening, Devon and I dressed for the annual Hale Foundation Gala. It was being held at a historic building downtown, full of velvet chairs and sculpted lighting that made everyone look important. He adjusted his bow tie in the mirror and asked, "You okay?" "Peachy," I said, glossing my lips. We arrived a little before 8. Guests floated around with practiced ease, air-kissing and name-dropping, the way people who inherit legacies tend to do. As the speeches began, I stood near the back of the room with a glass of water and my phone in hand. I wasn't drinking. I wanted clarity. Malis took the stage, glowing under the spotlight, the picture of grace and philanthropy. "We at the Hale Foundation remain committed to the privacy of our partners," she said, smiling into the microphone, "to protecting women's voices and boundaries in both digital and professional spaces." I nearly laughed. As if on cue, my phone buzzed in my palm. A message from Joseph, the cybersecurity consultant I'd hired a few weeks back. Confirmed, remote surveillance software, active on home system. Audio feed accessible via mirrored cloud, high-level install, done remotely. I blinked slowly, not surprised, just validated. They were listening, watching, recording. This wasn't marriage. This was onboarding into a corporate entity. I quietly left the main hall and stepped outside onto the balcony, breathing in the night air. I messaged Joseph back. Pull it. Document everything. Wipe my end. Send me logs. Then I walked back inside like nothing had happened. By the next morning, every account I'd ever shared with Devon, even the ones we never fully used, had new passwords. My legal documents were updated. My financials moved to independent entities. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake, Napoleon said. And Melis was making hers, publicly, under a chandelier, talking about empowerment while surveilling the woman her son supposedly loved. The irony would have been comical if it hadn't been so offensive. I watched her from the edge of the crowd as she raised a glass to women's autonomy. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. But I did smile, just slightly. Let's see how you explain that when I go public. The Hale family beach house was the kind of place that made everything feel like a staged photograph. Whitewashed shutters, gleaming decks, and a wind that smelled like it had been filtered through designer salt. It was supposed to be a weekend to relax before the big push toward finalizing wedding details. But I wasn't here to unwind. I was here to watch, listen, collect. I'd stopped explaining myself weeks ago. Now I just cataloged. Saturday afternoon, I wandered out toward the patio where Melis stood in a light linen dress, chatting with a man I vaguely recognized from the family's donor events. Howard, something or other, a legacy lawyer who always smelled like cigars and entitlement. I stayed out of sight, slipping behind a potted palm just close enough to hear. She's well positioned, Melis said, swirling her drink slowly. Even if Devon's venture doesn't pan out, Rachel has assets. She's our buffer. Our buffer, Howard repeated with a half laugh. I didn't flinch, not visibly, but inside, something locked into place. So that's what I was to them, a line item in a crisis plan, not a partner, not a woman he loved, not even a name, just a financial failsafe. People don't see you for who you are. They see you for what they need. I walked back inside, steady, heart drumming out a metronome of resolve. In the living room, guests milled around with wine glasses and compliments. I nodded, smiled, played the part, but inside, I was rewriting the entire script. Later that evening, dinner was served. Nothing fancy, just close family and inner circle friends, as Melis called them. We sat around the elongated dining table while the staff brought out grilled fish, asparagus, and roasted peaches. Melis tapped her fork lightly against her glass. A quick toast, she said, rising with that rehearsed poise. To Rachel. I stiffened. Compliments from Melis came wrapped in lace and razor wire. We've allowed her to continue working, she said, voice sugar slick, because we believe every woman deserves to feel purposeful. And she's quite bright, for her background. The table laughed, not because it was funny, but because that's what you do when power speaks. Devon didn't say a word. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't even blink. I smiled, nodded, and raised my glass, then drank every drop in one slow sip. It wasn't a compliment. It was a cage, wrapped in politeness. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I waited until everyone was asleep. Devon lay in bed beside me, breath even, arms stretched across the pillow like he still believed in peace. I slipped out quietly, padded barefoot across the room, opened my laptop, and logged into my trust dashboard. One by one, I moved funds into newly structured accounts. I closed outdated permissions. I paused my Hale-adjacent philanthropic disbursements with a single click. They'd wanted my net worth without ever respecting my self-worth. No more. At 1:17 a.m., my inbox dinged. A notification from Thayer, subject line, trust exploitation. Evidence, confirmed. I clicked, read, and whispered into the silence. It was worse than I thought. I knew the minute I zipped up my dress that tonight would be the last time I'd wear anything that made me feel like I had to prove I belonged. My hair was pinned perfectly, my earrings borrowed sparkle, but the armor wasn't in the styling, it was in the data I had in my phone. Facts didn't need sequins, just timing. Devon didn't notice I was quieter than usual in the car, or maybe he did, and chose not to ask. That was his way now, coexisting without confrontation. We drove in silence through downtown Seattle, toward the venue lit up like a modern cathedral of legacy. The Hale Foundation Gala was designed to dazzle. Crystal chandeliers, live quartet, photo ops with well-dressed donors who liked their philanthropy with a side of champagne. As we walked into the marble foyer, staff guided us toward the grand ballroom. The whole thing felt like a coronation, only I wasn't sure who the queen was anymore. I spotted Malis before she spotted me. Standing by the stage, dressed in deep navy, flanked by 2 board members, she smiled wide for the cameras. Her posture didn't just say she ran the room, it said the room existed because of her. An usher handed me a program. My name was nowhere, but I wasn't surprised. Then the lights dimmed, and a massive screen lit up the ballroom with the gala's feature video, The Faces Behind the Giving. I watched silently as names flashed, dollar figures soared. Then an image I recognized, a check presentation ceremony from last fall, money I'd donated quietly through a trust to fund tech programs for underrepresented girls. My trust. And yet, the caption read, "Presented by Malis Hale, visionary of women's futures." I didn't blink, didn't react, just watched my generosity rebranded, my signature erased and replaced. Stealing someone's work is easy, stealing their power is harder. I turned slightly and walked toward the nearest column for a moment of cover. That's when Lily, Devon's cousin, brushed past me and whispered, "You should know, your name's not on Devon's life insurance policy anymore. Malis had it switched last month." I froze. What? She told the firm it was a temporary correction, but she reinstated herself as the beneficiary. I stared at her, stunned into stillness, and then I nodded. Thank you. They planned for my presence, but they never planned for my permanence. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was systemic. It was surgical. I wasn't fighting for a relationship. I was unraveling a network that had underestimated the wrong woman. When Malis took the stage to give her closing speech, the room hushed. She stood with one hand on the podium, the other gesturing gracefully as she spoke about empowerment, integrity, the sacred duty of safeguarding women's voices. I didn't laugh. I didn't interrupt. I waited. When the applause rang out, I walked up the side aisle slowly, with the composure of someone who already knew the ending. I waited for her to step down, for the flashbulbs to die out. Then I leaned in close, smile polite. "You've given me everything I need," I said. "Tonight was perfect." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." I walked away without another word. Outside, the valet brought the car around. Devon was still inside the ballroom, but I wasn't looking for him. I slid into the back seat alone, took out my phone, and pulled up the message thread with Thayer. Release the audit. All of it. My phone buzzed again just as the driver pulled away from the curb. Thayer's reply came in one line. "It's live. They'll be calling you in the morning." God. I woke up to 32 missed calls and a phone that wouldn't stop vibrating. The first headline I saw was from a business news outlet. Hale Foundation under fire. Audit reveals ghost donor shells. Beneath it, my name, subtly referenced as the anonymous donor whose financial trail exposed discrepancies in public reporting. Devon had texted me 5 times before 7 a.m. "We need to talk. Call me." I didn't know. "Please don't do this like this. Let's fix this. This is spiraling." I turned off notifications and opened my laptop. A new email from Thayer sat at the top of my inbox with the subject, Prenup Draft Metadata. Read this. I clicked it open. The document attached was titled Postnuptial Agreement, Draft 3, with a creation date stamped clearly. 2 weeks before Devon proposed. I stared at it. No emotion rose, no gasp, no heart drop, because I had nothing left to give them. Before he bent a knee, they'd already planned how to walk me out. The agreement itself was meticulous, exact percentages, asset protection clauses, even a behavioral clause that triggered forfeiture if I was found acting in a manner that compromised family reputation. So this was never about love, it was about risk management. I stood from my desk, walked into the kitchen, and poured coffee with a stillness that scared even me. Every movement had a gravity now, like each decision carried weight. It did. By noon, media vans had begun parking across the street. I hadn't said a word publicly. I didn't need to. The documents were speaking for me. Around 3 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time a name I didn't expect. Isolde. I answered. "Hey," she said gently. "You okay?" I didn't respond. "I thought you should know. This isn't the first time." That caught my breath. "What do you mean?" "My mother told me years ago. Malis did the same thing to Devrin's first fiancé. Her name was Claire. She didn't have your money or your legal brain. And when she asked questions, they made her feel crazy. They started calling her unstable at dinners. She left in the middle of the night, no ring, no closure." I sank into the sofa. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I didn't have the guts to say anything earlier, and because I've watched you walk into a war zone dressed like a guest." I pressed a hand to my forehead, the pressure grounding me. So this wasn't a glitch, it was a blueprint, a machine designed to extract, rewrite, replace. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Hours, maybe. The daylight faded, and the condo shifted into the quiet blue of early evening. I remembered every dinner where I doubted myself, every shrug I ignored, every moment I told myself they didn't mean it that way. But they had. They always did. It wasn't just betrayal, it was protocol. I was supposed to fold and disappear. Instead, I opened a new document, blank, clean, mine, and I began to write. Not a message. Not a letter, a new plan, no edits allowed. Just as I was about to delete the half-drafted apology I never intended to send to Devrin, the doorbell rang. I crossed the room slowly, knowing exactly who it was before I opened it. Devrin stood there, tired, unshaven, hands deep in his pockets. "We need to talk," he said, eyes darting behind me, like someone might be watching. "Off the record." He stood in the doorway like he expected to be let in, and I, because I needed closure more than I needed distance, stepped aside and said nothing. "Before you say anything," I warned, "don't start with, 'I didn't know.'" Devrin closed the door gently behind him. He looked thinner, sleep-deprived. But I didn't offer sympathy. "I didn't," he said anyway, too quickly. "Not everything. I didn't know what she was doing with your name, or the audit, or the insurance. God, Rachel, I swear." "You didn't know," I repeated. "But you suspected." He sat down slowly, like he thought moving gently might reduce the weight of what he'd done. "I tried to stay out of it," he muttered. "And that's exactly why you're in it now." He looked up, the room stretching in silence between us. "We can fix this. I can talk to her. We can pull it back." I stared at him, not in anger anymore, just clarity. "Devrin," I said calmly, "I'm not asking for repair. I'm setting the terms for exit." He swallowed. "So that's it?" "No," I said. "That's the beginning." 2 days later, I stood before a small crowd of journalists and close confidants in a quiet media room downtown. No podium, no branding, just me, a chair, and a press packet. "I've kept silent for a long time, not out of fear, but strategy," I began. They leaned in. "I'm not here to accuse. I'm here to confirm. Yes, I contributed over $12 million to the Hale Foundation under private trusts. Yes, those funds were credited to another party without consent. Yes, I was vetted before I was proposed to. Yes, a divorce clause was written before a wedding invitation ever was." Flashes went off, but I didn't pause. My net worth is $86 million. Every cent earned, every asset chosen. I never needed to be rescued. What I needed was to be respected. I looked directly into the camera. Love doesn't require permission to exist. But it demands the truth to survive. I stood, nodded once, and left the room. 3 hours later, I arrived at the Hale family retreat house. I didn't ask to be let in. I handed the envelope to the butler, who looked like he'd just been handed a live grenade. Inside, the prenup, unsigned, a certified withdrawal of all current and future donations, and a handwritten note. I'm not walking away. I'm walking home, to myself. I didn't stay to see who read it first. Back at home, Thayer had already filed the legal paperwork to retract my name from all Hale Foundation materials, archival and promotional. We'd also flagged several misattributed donations for potential IRS review. The next day, an email from Malis arrived, just one sentence. You handled this with more grace than I expected. I underestimated you. I forwarded it to Thayer. No comment. Later that afternoon, I stood in my kitchen, watching a pot of tea begin to boil. The calm didn't feel like the absence of war. It felt like the result of winning one. My phone lit up. News alerts. Hale Foundation under investigation. Anonymous donor retracts $12,000 on your pledge. Requests audit clarification. Philanthropy or performance? Questions arise around legacy nonprofits. I didn't smile. I just watched. Now, I whispered to no one, let's see what they do without my silence. I had just finished reviewing a pitch deck from a Latina-led agri-tech startup when I heard the knock. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't timid. Just present. I glanced at the door of my new co-working suite, tucked in a refurbished brick building on the edge of downtown. The space wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Every square foot funded by my own grit, not attached to anyone else's name. Devon stood there, empty-handed, looking older than he had a month ago. I didn't invite him in, I just stepped aside. He walked in and looked around like he was trying to match the space to the version of me he thought he knew. After a beat, he said quietly, "You've built something." I had to. He nodded once. Then, after a pause, he said, "I didn't protect you because I didn't think I had to." It hung in the air for a moment, heavier than any apology he might have offered. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. "You didn't protect me because you didn't believe I was ever in danger," I said, voice even. "That's the problem." He sat down slowly in the chair across from my desk, but it was clear. This wasn't a conversation. It was a conclusion. "I told myself silence was neutrality," he said, "but I know now it was compliance." I studied him, his downturned mouth, the way his shoulders sagged like he was expecting me to soften. I didn't. "There's no war here, Devon," I told him. "Just a wall. One we didn't build together, but one I refuse to scale alone." He nodded again. No more arguments, no promises, just truth. We sat in the silence for a moment longer. Then he stood. "I wish you well," he said at the door. I gave him a quiet nod. "You'll need it." And just like that, he was gone. I returned to my chair and pulled up the startup's proposal again, but my eyes weren't on the numbers. My mind was back at the beginning, the first lunch with Milas, the jokes, the legalese disguised as tradition, the name that disappeared from invitations and insurance forms. They expected me to fold quietly. Instead, I unfolded everything they tried to hide. Silence, I'd learned, is a tool. In the right hands, it's not surrender, it's strategy. Later that week, I got a notification. Malis had stepped down from the Hale Foundation board. No press statement, no public fallout, just a clean, strategic exit. No apology came. None was needed. Because here's the thing about grace. It isn't about giving them a pass. It's about choosing not to need their approval. I was pouring a cup of tea when my phone rang. A reporter. "Ms. West," she said, voice smooth and friendly. "Now that the storm has passed, would you like to make a statement?" I smiled to myself, took a sip, and replied, "Why would I? The story already told itself." The first time I stepped onto the vineyard property, it was early morning. The light hadn't quite stretched over the hills yet, and the air smelled of eucalyptus and earth. I kicked off my shoes, let the dew wet my toes, and felt something I hadn't touched in months. Stillness. There were no reporters now. No gala lights, no curated statements, no boardroom whispers. Just rows of vines and a long stretch of silence. My kind of silence. The Hale scandal hadn't died, but it had shifted. Malis lost 3 board seats in less than 10 days. 2 major donors withdrew, and social media had branded her with a hashtag that no PR team could scrub. Devon had gone dark too. Not a post, not a quote, not even a staged walk to his car. But I wasn't watching. I was building. At a quiet retreat space I'd designed months before the fallout, I hosted a soft opening for my foundation. No ribbon cutting, no press. Just 15 women, a stack of notebooks, and a whiteboard with one phrase in black marker. They tried to silence me with contracts. I responded with purpose. The Worth Initiative was real now, no longer an idea sketched on napkins during stolen minutes between legal meetings. It was a living thing, a space for women to build their own capital, their own voices, their own exits. A woman from Sacramento shared how she'd been written out of her company's exit plan despite being a co-founder. Another, a single mother from Tacoma, said her business pitch had been borrowed, then bankrolled by someone else. They all nodded at each other like veterans of the same quiet war. I didn't share my story. I didn't need to. They already knew it. Different names, same pattern. Back at the main house that evening, there was a letter waiting for me, handwritten. Expensive stationery. Melis's signature ink. Just one sentence. I underestimated your restraint. No apology. No request. Just acknowledgement. I didn't frame it. Didn't burn it either. I slid it into a legal folder and filed it under a label I'd created long ago. For documentation only. She mistook silence for weakness. That's why she lost. The next morning, I slipped into a pair of flats, left my hair undone, and walked the vineyard as the sun rose behind the hills. No makeup, no pressure, just peace. I stopped near a fence line where a new patch of soil had been tilled. I walked into their world thinking I had to earn my place, I whispered to myself. I left realizing I owned my own. I didn't need to be at their table. I'd built my own. Later that week, I received another call from the same reporter who had asked before. Ms. West, she said, now that everything has settled, do you want to give a final statement? I paused. Why would I said with a small smile. The story already told itself. But this time, I walked to the corner of my desk, hit record on my own camera, and sat down. To any woman who's ever been made to feel like a guest in her own story, I began, eyes level with the lens, voice calm. You don't owe them grace. You owe yourself the truth.